and children.
That's right. So some of you may have read recently an article that we put out called "There Actually Isn't an App for That," and it was about the Montessori, the Pink Tower, and apps or other sorts of experiences that try and replicate those experiences. And it got us to thinking a lot about what can technology do or what can it do, where is it really successful or not. And
right. When is it appropriate and when
right.
it is not appropriate, and is it really good for kids, and if so, what ages?
That's right. And we also then started seeing a lot of traction. A lot of parents and readers were very interested into it. A lot of folks were peeking at that article.
Yeah,
so I wanted to do a follow-up.
It's something that resonates so much with parents today because it's so new. But technology itself isn't new. Technology has been part of humanity.
It's perhaps one of the most essential qualities of the human experience. So let's be clear about what we mean by technology.
Right.
This pen is technology.
So we're going to define technology.
That's right.
This is technology.
Certainly.
Yeah, it just doesn't mean obviously this is technology too, but sorry.
No, we're really talking
but
about...
this is also technology.
That's right. So what we're really talking about are learning experiences, things that are designed specifically to teach, like apps or games, websites, and that sort of thing. And there's a lot of, like I said, technology in the world and technology for kids, but we're trying to limit the scope here because otherwise we're trying to swallow the ocean. So I think part of what gets people concerned about technology is the newness of it.
Right.
So one of the things we wanted to kind of start with is giving an analogy to technology that was quite a hot topic when we were growing up, and that is television.
But you can go even further than that. Radio was also a hot topic, and people were debating its appropriateness way back when it was invented and new, and they were kind of skeptical of how it would change the face of humanity. And then TV, when we were children, was kind of like the big thing.
Yeah, it was, of course, we were not born we weren't children in the 50s, so it was not like howdy doody time. But in the 70s and 80s, television was really,
Smurfs.
it was really a thing. And, I grew up in a house that had a lot of television, a lot of media, and we had a number of TVs. We were kind of TV addicts, and I grew up watching a ton of cartoons and television. And I think you had a different experience.
Yeah, I grew up in a household where my parents kind of restricted most of my TV access totally when I was very young. So I was allowed to watch some Sesame Street and some Mr. Rogers, but that was kind of it, just very little, small amounts of it until I was pretty old, like really entering elementary school is when kind of I became aware that all these other kids had been watching these other programs that I didn't know about. And it wasn't always a good thing, so although I feel really passionate today still about TV and screen time, there's still that part of me that remembers what it was like to be a child, and everybody else is talking about these little blue characters, that they have been identifying with and making stories about, and I didn't know who the Smurfs were, and that was really important back then.
Yeah, and so when we met in college, and when we first kind of met, that was one of the things that was very kind of confusing to me, is that she had you had no kind of like cultural experience. I would say, oh, don't you remember watching blah, 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 or doing this or that, and you're like, no, I don't.
Yeah.
And of course, as you get older, it doesn't matter as much. But the point is that with the television, that there's kind of a good and a bad, right? Yeah. So the positive was that I had kind of a lot of cultural knowledge and sort of bonded with the broader culture around kids' TV and cereal and all that junk. And the other hand, I was kind of addicted to TV, and it took me even well into adulthood. It was very hard for me to not have television in my life. It sort of was like a security blanket. It kind of got stuck in my brain, and you were very different on that.
Yeah, I had a lot of outside playtime, and the TV wasn't on in my house a lot. It was on a little bit in the evenings when my parents were watching, and again, I was allowed to watch Mr. Rogers and a little bit of Sesame Street. But other than that, I spent a lot of time daydreaming and reading books and playing, with toys, hands-on toys, and I attribute that greatly to my love of reading and just
So does that mean that
being a creative person?
Yeah. So does that mean that her experience was good and mine was bad? And the answer is no,
No,
it doesn't.
they're
different.
We didn't feel that way when we were first married.
And I don't feel that way today. And I think that's actually where we want to transition into thinking about technology that we're defining and talking about now, which is things like apps and Sesame Street websites and that kind of thing. There's three kind of principles we want to talk about. And the first, which relates exactly back to like, was the TV bad or good? And that is intentional. When we talk about technology, if you want to use it effectively, whether it's in a classroom or in your home, it's about being intentional. That's true in most things when we talk about interacting with the child, and it's certainly true with technology, being intentional about what we're doing. And being intentional means being aware that there are two kinds of learnings that are happening. There's an explicit learning, the thing that the object or the app or whatever was designed to teach, and then there's the implicit learning, the things that are sort of come along with it. So in my case, watching, let's say, G.I. Joe, there was an explicit lesson about patriotism and so forth.
Right.
There were also all sorts of implicit lessons about commercialism and advertising and gunplay and so forth. And they all had an effect on me, and just like becoming addicted to television, it had an implicit effect on me, even though it wasn't explicitly what the show was about. And that's the same with any kind of technology, including apps. And so we actually have our handy-dandy, non-technical piece of technology here.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to reiterate on that point that when it comes to teaching children, or when it just comes to children developing and growing and learning, everything that they touch and interact with is teaching them something. And I think we tend to have this point of view in our culture about children where we think that we have to teach them all the things that they need to know, and that is how they learn them. And that's not actually true.
That's right.
Everything they touch, every environment they're in, they are learning something from. And the question is, what is it that they're learning?
That's right.
And so should we talk about the blocks?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so here I just have a couple unit blocks. We own these. Our children played with them. Let's talk about what children are learning from this. Okay, so one block. What is a baby learning from a block? Feed like the weight. A baby would be learning how to pick it up and set it down. So gross motor skills. A baby would be tasting it. And so there'd be a lot of sensory input, not just from the fingers, but also oral, which is very important for baby development. What's a toddler learning? Toddler would be learning how to stack them. You know, it would be hard, you know, for a little toddler, but they would be learning about how they sit together. And they'd be making the noise and learning, you know, about how wood sounds when it's banged together, which you might not think is important, but actually is really important for auditory development. What's a preschooler learning from a set of blocks? Creativity, right? They're learning how to set them together and how to sequence them and how to order them and how to categorize them and sort them. There's just so many things that children can learn from physical materials.
That's right.
And that is primarily the way I really believe, and I believe most educators who work in early childhood believe that children should be learning. Like the natural way is through the senses. It's kind of generally accepted now.
And the point about the implicit and the explicit is that the blocks, let's say, here as this example, they weren't necessarily designed for all of those purposes.
Right.
Like the sound that they make is kind of just a product of the fibers in the wood and the way they were carved and so forth. But there's something it's nature. It comes from the product. It comes from the material itself. There's an implicit thing that's being taught through those auditory experiences.
Right.
Then there's also the explicit, the purpose, which was probably to make designs or build a little house or think about Legos. They're made to construct things.
Right.
But what children do with those toys can really be very divergent from what was expected. And that's because the implicit qualities, the implicit learning qualities are so strong. Let's talk about now when you take a digital version of these.
Right.
Take
so
an app of
let's
blocks.
put that on this and talk about what happens. Okay, so it's not a new thing anymore.
Right.
There are thousands of apps out there to teach skills to children.
That's right.
And so if you go looking and hunting for example, toddler or pre-K blocks app, you will just a million will pop up. And so the question is that teaching anything to the child?
And the answer is yes, it is teaching something. It may not be teaching what you would think, but that's why we talk about intentional and unintentional or explicit and implicit lessons. There's something that the child is learning through that experience with the technology that you may or may not be intending. Right. They may have designed, just in the same way that these blocks were designed, to be a stacking toy. The app may try to replicate that. It may even try to replicate some of the things like physics, so one is heavier than the other, or the way they tumble, the sound. But all of that, it has to be coded in, and it has to be done with extreme intention, which makes all of those things explicitly important, and it robs the material of some of their kind of native underlying properties, the things that make them so engaging to kids.
Right, and the biggest one, of course, is the sensory input.
That's right.
And so the visual input might be there, even though it's on a small screen. So it might look like this, but just because it's 2D image, it drastically changes how the child can interpret the information and sort and categorize it in the right, meaningful ways inside their brain in order to grow and develop. And so you're missing the taste of it. You're missing the smell of the wood. You're missing the weight of it. And we were talking earlier about how, you're missing the way that, like, the balance works. Like, this does not balance, and this does. But the question is, why? Why does this work and this not? And so what an app can teach a child is that if they move this piece over, it will go, ding, you're correct. You put it, you sequenced it one on top of the other. But what this is not teaching them is why it doesn't work in real life.
Yeah, so they can replicate the center of gravity in the physics, but there is something different. And there really are two issues at work, and one is there are apps that are very open-ended, or games that are open-ended, but a lot of apps do have a correct path. So they want you to put this on top of this, and if you put it this way, it's and if you put it this way, it's ding, right? So they want to kind of structure it in a way because they're trying to make something explicit, an explicit learning experience. But the two challenges with that, or the two concerns we have, is one is that kind of classic punish by reward. So it really creates a sense of there's a right and a wrong, and you're punished for the wrong, and you're rewarded for the right, whether it's or a no, try again, or something soft, or something more stern, that teacher voice that you will see in kids' apps. It's sort of working counter to what we would advise.
Good educators know that children need to learn on their own and not, learn that something's wrong because we tell them that's wrong. So in real life, if a child was playing these blocks and doing something that, was going to go off balance, as a teacher, I would want to say, oh, you're doing that wrong. Do it like this, and ding, you're right. Reward for doing it the correct way. That's not a good way to teach children. That's not a way that's going to help facilitate their love for learning and allow them to learn on their own, experience it, and develop a deep, meaningful relationship.
That's right. So the other part that makes it kind of a potential problem with it is that it implies that there's a certain path, or there's a specific path. So the purpose of the block becomes very much about stacking it this way, or maybe it's a very open-ended app and you can put them wherever, and it's about the blocks tumbling. Right. But it isn't quite the same as what happens when the child actually puts the block on here and it falls. And then they see, oh, this is an interesting shape. I didn't realize I could do that. And they could walk around and they could move it, and now they get a different idea. And any of us who have, when we work with children, we see them at play. I'm always amazed at the things that children come up with in their play. Yeah. It's so divergent and so creative that I regularly step back and say, I never in a million years would have had that idea. That this is now something. I'm going to look at this and I'm going to say it looks like an alligator mouth, and a child would look at this and they would come up with something that I frankly can't even imagine. That's where the physical materials, the things that are so unscripted, really come in and really make a difference.
Right. And I want to make a point that we're talking mostly about children ages 3 and older. Yeah. Using these apps. Both of us feel very strongly that really there's no educational value in apps for children under the age of 3. It's just too important for them to be immersed in physical, tangible objects for their learning.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's never appropriate to use technology with children.
Right.
It's about the intention. So when you think, to go back to the first point, when we use technology, just as we would use any materials, we need to be aware that there's something is going to be taught. Right? There's a lesson in there. And sometimes the lesson is what we thought it was going to be, like, hey, wow, cool shape. These blocks were designed to make a cool shape. Right. And sometimes it's not, like, hey, now I made a drum. And that wasn't necessarily what the purpose was, but it is an unintentional piece. And so when you think about technology, when they're using that app, yes, they might be learning about the physics and the shapes. They're also learning about technology. How does technology work? How to work a touch screen? How to interact online? How to skip an ad? What happens when you click on this button and it takes you to a website? There's all kinds of things that are learned that we once called like media literacy and so forth through that experience. So being intentional and understanding that they're going to pick up a lot of stuff is part of the experience. Mm-hmm. And the other piece, the second one, is all things in moderation. Yeah. So even for the very youngest ones, let's say you have an 18-month-old and you plug them in front of a Sesame Street video, is that harmful in and of itself? Not necessarily. It is harmful if it is their only diet in the way that all you ate all the time were candy bars, your teeth would rot out, or apples. Like, you need a balanced diet. And the younger they are, the less they need.
Right.
So,
well, I was just going to add that you use the example of Sesame Street.
Yeah.
It's kind of universally thought of as kind of a benign show.
And a wonderful show, well-designed, very smart people, educators who work on that. Yep.
Yeah, I remember when we had really young children, we thought of it as a positive, way to use media if we needed to have some screen time. And let's be real, parents today often need ways to entertain their children, especially if they don't have outside support.
That's right. And I think we can feel really guilty about using these devices sometimes because and I think that's where we kind of get into a trap that, well, it has to be educational, so Sesame Street is better than Inspector Gadget or something like that. Yeah. And I guess potentially it is in some ways. But again, there's something about the intention. Like, what are you really going to learn from that is different? So yes, you can learn something from the app. You can learn something from the screen, whether it's a video or not. But you're not learning quite the same thing in the same way as you are with those real materials. The sandpaper alphabet is going to teach you something very different than a digital flashcard.
Right. And speaking of the sandpaper letters, the purpose of the sandpaper letters is actually the sandpaper.
That's right.
And when you put it on a screen, and I know a lot of parents, when they find that app, they're all excited because, then you can use the finger to trace the alphabet, which is great. It's tactile, but you're missing the tactile part when you put it on a smooth, flat surface.
That's right.
The sandpaper is actually really an important part of that whole lesson.
That's right.
Engaging the senses.
It pushes on a topic that we won't really explore here, but that is the limitation of technology and how we're still at a very early and pretty immature stage where we're trying to replicate real life in our technology, and at some point in the future we'll figure out how to use technology in a native way and stop trying to make these kind of haptic experiences.
Our children will.
Our children will, which is actually the third point, which is there's one of the reasons you would consider making sure that kids have exposure to technology is that they're going to live in a tech-rich future. Things are not going away.
Right. And
if we want them to be good consumers of technology and making good decisions and being the ones who can innovate and really make this technology do the things that it's best at, instead of trying to replicate this, which is not good at doing, but coming up with something radically different, we need to make sure that they've been exposed to technology and have an appreciation and understanding of what it can and can't do. And that means being intentional with how we expose them, giving them some exposure. And just like with TV, the way that we use TV now is participating with them. So that intentionality, that all things in moderation, and that third is that there's a value in the exposure to technology itself, because otherwise they're just not going to understand how to interact with it, and that is going to be a big problem.
Right. So I think that kind of sums it up for today.
It does.
It does.
So Ed, we're curious about, we'd love to know if you have questions about technology or how you're currently using technology. The fact is there's no one right answer. Studies are contradictory. They're bad, they're good, It's not this, it's not that. And again, I think it's because technology is in such an immature state. But as parents and educators, the answer, I don't think, is to put our head in the sand. We have to kind of embrace it and learn to use it.
Engage in the conversation.
That's right. So we want to know how you're engaging in that conversation, what you're doing and how you're dealing with it, where you get worried or where your questions are, and maybe we can try and handle those in a future video.
right, so if you would take a minute to go ahead and comment on this video and just write down like, I don't know, it can be anything, like about feelings of guilt with technology and how you're addressing that, or whether you use apps with your children and whether you feel like it's justified or not, or whether you don't have a TV in your house anymore and you made that decision because of this. We really want to hear from you and hear about what you think, because there's no clear answer, and it's just the best that we can do as parents is to just engage in this open conversation about it and learn from each other.
That's right. Together we'll be stronger. So anyway, I've been David.
And I'm Aubrey.
And thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
We'll see you
Thanks for
soon.
watching.